Thank you. If you'll indulge me for a minute, I want to take you on a little trip to Tillamook because I think the story of the brand, and in particular the story of these last 5 years, starts with the place, also named Tillamook.
Oregon was a territory, and the Great Migration West, the wagon trains came in the 1840s, and they kept going west, and this is as far west as you could go. You or I or anyone else could show up here and claim 640 acres, and it was yours if you made any improvements to the land. This is an alluvial plain. If you look 6 miles east of here, the mountains come onto a flat plain where the native grasses are not just substantial, but nutritious. And 5 rivers flowing into Tillamook Bay meant that you always had a water source, and the quality and quantity of the water sources included endless rain. And so it's kind of like predestined to be a dairy property.
You know, it really starts at the farm. We have to start with a great product, really, to get to a great cheese. It's only as good as the milk you start with.
I do believe that Tillamook represents this region very well because of how it was created. And it was created by a farmer's co-op, and it is ran by a farmer's co-op.
They're the owners of the company. You know, they're the ones paying us every day to make this quality Tillamook cheese.
With them, it's tied very directly to the land, and it matters every day. It takes incredible dedication. It takes a willingness not to look at profit, but to look at purpose.
Tillamook is where the pride is at. That's what keeps our dairy industry flowing. That's what keeps everybody working. It's the largest employer of the area. So the products are really a direct reflection of the whole region.
They bring in 1 million tourists a year here. And that alone is magnificent because people come here for no other reason than to get an ice cream cone at the cheese factory.
This is truly a farmer-owned and farmer-driven business, and the values inherent in that, meaning the values of these dairy farmers in this county, really do translate into the way we make cheese every day and the way we run this company.
You can be just about anywhere in the States, and someone asks you where you're from. Oh man, Tillamook ice cream, Tillamook cheese. I just love your products. I mean, it really pumps you up.
Well, I was very excited to be invited to participate in tonight's Brand Forum. I have a tremendous respect for the Irish food and beverage industry and your global influence on the culinary trends, culinary heritage, and the world of food and beverage. And in particular, have really come to be impressed with the collaboration and coordination represented by Board Bia. As well as the sustainability positioning, I think is brilliant for the country and for the industry. So I would like to share a little bit about our story and in particular the last 5 years. As mentioned in the video, we're a farmer-owned cooperative. I, as the CEO of Tillamook, have the honor and the privilege to work for the 90 families that own small dairy farms on the coast of Oregon. I think this is has proven over time as we've driven more aggressive growth and marketing and sought to be a market leader, the ownership structure of the company has proven to be a real asset as these families, as many of the other brands we heard here tonight, look long term and really have a commitment to continuing the history and heritage of their approach to the product. Someone had the idea 100 or so years ago to stamp the name of the town on the rind of the cheese, and that sort of set the brand in motion. Over decades and decades, we've invited visitors to Tillamook, and so for the first 95 years or so, those were major drivers of the brand. And in 2012, Tillamook was primarily a Pacific Northwest brand, very high penetration, high market share in the Pacific Northwest, primarily focused on selling and marketing cheddar cheeses, although we had been producing ice cream since 1947. It was a bit of an afterthought, had a few other product lines as well. As many agricultural co-ops would have a tendency to be, we were pretty volume focused, and so as a high share, sort of volume focused company, we even at a premium with a premium product tended to be pretty promotionally driven. We were certainly under-resourced and under-invested to compete in the very large categories, even confined to the Western U.S., the very large categories where we compete with very well-resourced multinational global food companies. However, there was an aspiration for growth. The farming families that own the business and many of the employees that have worked in the business for decades and decades understood that growth would bring more resources, the ability to reinvest in the company, stability, and the ability to make distributions to the members, the farmer members of the co-op. And so if we fast forward to today, we are a fast-growing premium brand that has pretty good distribution throughout the western United States and Texas. We have certainly, over this time period, strengthened the premium positioning, and we are enjoying growth, not just in our cheddar category, but in particular in ice cream and yogurt, but in all of the categories where we offer products. The growth, so the other interesting point to note, so today we are the number 4 selling food and beverage brand in the western United States. So for a small farmer-owned cooperative from the very rural coast of Oregon, that feels like quite an accomplishment. And I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the things that have kind of helped to drive that. Revenue-wise, we took what had been a fairly long and somewhat spotty, kind of modest growth trajectory, and in 2012 turned it significantly to the point where over the last 5 years we've grown revenue by over 70% and expanded profits by 3 times, and member distribution, so distributions to the farmers, at a similar rate of expansion. And so when you look at this, the growth that we've seen, it hasn't been so much some bold reimagining of the strategy of the company, as much as it was sort of an uncovering of the strengths that already existed, and in fact had existed for decades and decades. And in combining that foundation with some insight into market trends and consumers, we've been able to introduce the brand to more consumers throughout the West, be a good partner for retailers, and drive growth and reinvest in that growth in the business for the long term. So essentially, one of the points I want to make here is the ways in which we have remained true to the brand foundation and really amplified and put a spotlight on the brand foundation, while at the same time leveraging consumer insights to understand where we can appropriately play for consumers in the various dairy categories where we compete. So when we look at brand foundation, for us, that was about going back to the origin. You saw from the film there that the co-op was formed in order to connect these farmers who were actually quite isolated. In fact, had to put product on a boat originally and take it around the Pacific Ocean, Columbia River, Willamette River, even to get to a market where people could consume the cheese. So connect those farmers with consumers in markets, particularly in Oregon, in the Portland market. And so when we've really taken inspiration from that origin story and sort of increased the focus on the farmer ownership and on shortening that distance between consumer and farm, or consumer and soil. And if in standard challenger parlance, if you think about what was our challenge has been to the disaggregated industrialized food system. Now, that's not going to sell any ice cream probably when I say that, but as a foundation for sort of strategy and where we're headed, and a confirmation of the owner's belief in what the company stood for. Many the employees that have worked for the company for decades, and many new employees that we attracted, that's been a very powerful concept. Also expanding that idea, the idea of good food, to understand the role that it plays in creating joy in everyday life. One of the key brand truths, of course, is around our product. And so we have, over the last 5 years, clarified our commitment to product, and I'll talk a little bit about how that's played out into new product introductions, but also into sort of reformulations or even pulling some product off the shelf. But we've defined what we refer to as real food principles, and adhere to those in our product offerings. Obviously, when you stand up here and talk about a journey of fairly rapid growth over a short period of time in a short speech, it's all going to sound like it was really well planned out and perfectly executed. Of course, everybody knows that was not the case. And one of the things that has been very interesting for us is navigating the ownership structure, which, as I mentioned, I believe to be a real strength. But also add some complexity to our business. I mean, we're not a brand marketing firm or a processing firm that can turn around to our suppliers and say, you will do this because this is what the market is expecting, or you will do this either to drive cost out of the system, or because it may give us a brand advantage, or even be more consistent with our brand. We've had to work with our ownership to sort of navigate what the company stands for, how we'll be going to market, what the messaging will be. And in my opinion, that's made the messaging stronger, the positioning stronger, and has helped us construct a core set of values, which we refer to the concept of stewardship, taking the place of terms like corporate social responsibility or sustainability, because that concept is something that really resonated with our owners. It's an idea that, of course, they are, for generations, not just stewards of this company, but stewards of the land, stewards of the brand. And so the way we've navigated that with our owners is to talk about the various constituencies that are affected by the company, whether it be the community, animals, the environment, which would be then the constituency of future generations, and sort of what kind of company would they like to have to pass on to that next generation. And so that's been a pretty powerful construct for us. So I talked about consumer insights. I'll just briefly kind of touch sort of philosophically on how we've approached it. We aspire to be somewhere between consumer oblivious, which probably isn't the best place to be, and completely consumer driven, which I would argue is also not the best place to be. And so while we have a strong set of values and principles and a brand identity built on the history and the heritage of the company, we do need to understand what consumers' interests are and how we might play into those. So we're not changing the brand or changing the foundation of the company in order to navigate around the consumer, but we also understand that we need to speak to the consumer in the ways that make sense to them and do a job for them that makes sense. So while we use a lot of, and this is a capability that we've built and invested in a lot over the last 5 years, we use a lot of purchase data, analysis, and various other means to gain insight about consumers and trends in the marketplace. We also continue to check those against the brand, and what the brand stands for, what the company stands for, what our farmer owner's interest is, and where we feel like the company should head. We also use a lot of sort of scrappier techniques, and for example, it was mentioned in the film that we get 1 million visitors. Actually, last year it was 1.3 million visitors to our factory. So we do a lot of intercepts there and just talk to consumers. We obviously have high engagement levels. on social media, going both ways, and so are gaining from that insights about the consumer. So, I'll mention there, because we have, depending on the company, you have a range of resources available to you to do consumer insights, and I think there's a lot of power in those sort of scrappier methods of consumer insights. The one caution is, of course, not to project a focus group of one into a complete strategy. And I think when you have a strong foundation in terms of the brand and what the company stands for and what the product stands for, then you're capable of then interpreting what you learn, whether it be in small, scrappier ways or whether it be with lots of analysis. Also, it helps to have somebody, whether it's somebody internal to the company, which we've added recently, or external, to do that materiality check for you and say, yeah, it was interesting that your neighbor thinks this, but that doesn't mean that there's a market for it. So, I'm a big fan of, and we've done this successfully, pressing into a market where we just have the right feeling about it. But it's important to discern that from real market analysis. But essentially, the construct or the framework that's worked really well for us on consumer insights is this jobs to be done idea. So what job is important to the consumer? And then among those jobs, which ones might we be most relevant for? So there's a couple of screens there. One is the idea that the way we think about markets and market share and competition and categories even may be completely irrelevant to the consumer who's looking for a key component to their family celebration. And so thinking about how, understanding how they're thinking about the use case scenarios is an important step for us in terms of applying consumer insights. And then the other one is understanding where we just can't play. So there are some really exciting trends in food and even in dairy that are happening right now in our part of the United States that we have opted out of because we just don't feel like it fits with the brand. Not that there's anything wrong with them, and we're respecting consumers' choices and the manufacturers' choices to bring those to market, but they're ones that we feel like the brand doesn't appropriately fit with, and therefore we've opted out. So, one, understanding the jobs to be done from the consumer standpoint, and then secondly, being objective about where you can play and where you can't play has been important, at least for us, in consumer insights. So when I talk about combining the brand foundation with insights, there are three areas that I thought I would touch on in terms of how we've done that. In terms of ensuring that we're offering a premium differentiated product that brings something new to the category. Secondly, in terms of how we're taking a more bold, challenger-oriented approach to communicating with the marketplace, with consumers. And then third, the partnerships, the win-win partnerships that we've developed with retailers. And so I thought I'd touch on those three things in terms of how we've applied that idea of brand foundation and consumer insights. So first of all, in product offering, we believe that we have a potential opportunity to participate in any category that is heavily dairy-based, if we can provide some value. And so this has caused us to take a hard look at the categories where we are already competing, in some cases for decades, as well as any new ones that we feel like maybe are exciting or interesting, or maybe are not so exciting or interesting but should be. And so as we've looked at, and I've got some of the products here that we've launched over the last couple of years, but this really for us started with an examination of our current product lineup. And so we took some risk in looking at some of the current products that we had, and have actually reformulated, in some cases, some already successful products. So for example, one of our big growth categories has been ice cream, and right in the middle of gaining massive distribution and getting a really nice growth in that category, we decided that there were some parts of the ingredient statement that were no longer appropriate for the brand. And so we went about reformulating our stabilizer system to get the artificial components of the stabilizer out there, which was not a small task. And we did that right at the time where we were getting distribution. Luckily, we were able to solve that problem appropriately. We did it without really marketing it, but successfully pulled that product into line with the rest of the products that we were offering. And another example of that is our non-Greek or traditional yogurt line. We recently, or not so recently, but over the last couple of years, reformulated that product. It was the number one selling yogurt in the Pacific Northwest and gaining nice distribution in the West, in parts of the West. And we reformulated that to raise the protein, lower the sugar content, which was a big change, and also ensure that the ingredient statement was in line with the long-standing brand values in the other categories. And so we knew from consumer testing that the taste profile of the newly formulated product was not appealing to a fairly significant percentage of current users, particularly in the Northwest where we were such a staple. And so it was a difficult decision for us to do that. Also, in reformulating the product, we needed to raise price because component costs had gone up significantly, and retailers were not thrilled about that, of course. And, candidly, that's worked okay. We've lost some share and lost some size of that business. Still believe it was the right thing to do to ensure that as we're looking at competing in multiple categories with a single brand, that every product we offer meets the brand standards. We have, I think the jury's still out on that one, and I know that we'll get, or believe that it'll gain over time. We've also introduced some new products and come to the party late on in a couple of areas like Greek yogurt, where we've taken the time to formulate appropriately, decide that we're capable of bringing something unique, and then entering. And that's been, pretty successful. We entered the super premium ice cream category, and, I would say the jury's still out on that one. We entered with a good product, probably not quite as differentiated or distinct, maybe I should use that word instead, as it probably should have been, or as we are in other categories. And so we have actually removed some products from the shelf if we felt like they were not complying with the brand standards. So, some of what had happened is pre-2012 there was a little bit of drift in terms of formulations and ingredients that we corrected. So the second area is around this challenger posture. So we really considered it a brand relaunch. We had done minimal advertising, if you will, in leading up to 2013, 2014. Most of it was, pretty generally appealing, but not super distinct, dairy typical advertising, showing farmers and cows and fields and that kind of thing, which there's nothing wrong with, except that we felt like it was time for us to sort of grab the mic a little bit and get some notice in the very competitive markets where we were competing. So our first campaign that we launched was called Dairy Done Right, and the insight here was that folks were beginning to pay a lot of attention to how their vegetables were grown, how their meat was raised, but they really weren't thinking about dairy. In fact, dairy wasn't really a relevant concept. I mean, of course, there's cheese and there's ice cream and there's yogurt and there's other dairy products, but dairy as a thing, no one was making a dairy grocery list, and even though we think of it, consumers weren't really necessarily thinking about dairy. And so what we wanted to do was sort of grab some attention and cause people to think, wait a minute, I'm not paying enough attention to that category. And oh, by the way, those things are all dairy. Why are they dairy? Because they all come from milk from a cow, which obviously kind of plays to our advantage relative to our competition, being fully integrated from soil all the way to shelf. So we launched this campaign with the intention of grabbing some attention and being distinct in its look and feel and kind of out of character for the category. So I'll show you this. So we felt like that was a pretty aggressive stance for us to take. Obviously, the music, the lack of voiceover, the colors and so forth were distinctive and were intended to grab attention either in digital media or television, traditional television, print. We kind of spread the campaign around social media as well. I should have mentioned that one of the big decisions and actually risks that we took in sort of relaunching the brand, if you will, is we partnered with an ad agency out of out of Los Angeles called 72 and Sunny. Their other brands were, they had a very small number of clients. Their other brands were large, very well-known global brands, and we were this tiny little co-op from Oregon. Luckily, we were able to convince them to take us on as a client because a couple reasons. One is because two of the founders were from Oregon, and one of them and the CEO had grown up in a small rural town of Oregon and loved our cheese, so that definitely helped. But also, they felt like we were credible in our claim to them that we wanted to do something different here and kind of shake up the category, and we wanted to push against the highly segmented, industrialized supply chain. And so we launched that first campaign. It was pretty well received. Honestly, we kind of thought it was going to make a bigger splash than it did, because even in this short period of time from conceiving of the campaign and launching it in that short period of time, we ended up with a lot of other folks talking about kind of the right way and wrong way to sort of do food and where your food should come from. So we thought we would step that up a little bit. There was a lot of what we were calling real washing going on, and so we took a little bit of risk to get a little more aggressive and push off a little harder on what we thought was sort of generally wrong with the food supply chain, and with could be wrong with dairy. We don't single out competitors specifically, but we wanted to sort of lead this uprising and get against big food or industrialized food, and in doing so, obviously endear consumers to the Tillamook brand. So I'll show you this.
Hey, Big Food. We've had some good times. You were so colorful, so sweet. But I've had enough of your artificial ingredients. Enough quantity over quality. I'm done. Goodbye, Big Food. Hello, farmers. Hello, co-op. Hello, integrity. Hello, Molly. Hello, naturally aged cheddar, made by a real craftsman. Hello, Dale.
Hi.
Hello, better lunch boxes, better breakfasts, better snack times, better Sunday family dinners. Hello, people who care about their food and how it's made. Hello, everyone. We found something real. Tillamook.
So that definitely felt risky and bold for us, both in terms of the amount of money it takes to produce something like that, but also more importantly, the kind of messaging that was quite aggressive. Those campaigns, we believe, really helped to establish the brand with consumers in a different light. It also helped us quite a bit in our conversations with retailers, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. I was actually, with both of those campaigns, we were a little bit nervous about how the local markets would respond. We did some focus groups because, we're sort of felt like a beloved local brand, and we didn't know how our core base in the Pacific Northwest would respond. And so when we showed folks that first Dairy Done Right campaign, we got a much better response than we thought from the local audience, who said basically, yeah, that's great. Somebody should have said that a while ago. So we were happy to hear that. The next campaign, we're starting to play a little bit closer to home in terms of product and farmers, and using farmers as sort of validation point for the claims we're making about the product and the product quality. Certainly in a context of eroding trust generally with the media. and other trusted institutions. We wanted to play against that a little bit with the farmer as kind of trusted source of food. So I think I'll cut this one short since we're probably going a little bit long here, but I'll show you just a minute of this. Okay, I didn't cut it short. Sorry, I heard some laughing, so I thought I would just keep going with that one. Plus, I like that one. So we also are doing a lot more sort of storytelling, and you've probably noticed certainly some of this advertising represents a pretty substantial budget. I'll mention that that first video that we showed, sort of that introduction to Tillamook. That was literally a couple of guys from a local production crew that we hired that have a drone and would sit and listen to us talk in front of cameras. And in fact, the voiceover talking about, if you could come here and claim your 640 acres, that was literally the guy that works in the Tillamook Museum, this tiny little house in downtown Tillamook, just talking. And so all of the narration that you heard in that was either him talking or me or just the guy who runs our ice cream production department. And even in the those ads, those are all real Tillamook kids and real Tillamook farmers. And the guy that it says hello Dale, the guy that guy's been at the company 47 years. So just the point being, like, really bringing to life the reality that already exists there. And certainly there's great creative work here, but it's based on that foundation. And we're playing to that with these farmer stories. So telling stories of, the Tillamook County Fair just happened. We told a lot of stories around that, showed folks from Tillamook, either employees or farmers or their kids, kind of at the fair, show some of the Mazzei family there and some of the things they like to do with ice cream, and there's a whole range of stories there. So we're really kind of telling those stories to connect consumers to the brand. Just a note on this topic, our marketing tactics have definitely changed over time. And while we sort of were doing and kind of started the more aggressive marketing with much more heavy in the traditional channels, notably television, we have moved so to where television was 60% of what we're doing. It's about 11%, maybe a little low, but we may have overcorrected. But that's kind of the move that we made. Another thing, so digital and Shopper have definitely gained in terms of share of where our media spend. Shopper includes a range of things from your traditional kind of in-store stuff to our brand ambassador program, where we have these little VW buses that we chop down so they look like Tillamook loaves of cheese, and we drive them around to stores, and we have brand ambassadors in front of the stores in various cities, those kinds of things. So I'll jump to retail partnerships just quickly, because this has definitely been a key to our growth, has been distribution gains. And so what we've found, there's one of the buses right there. So what we found is that we've had a lot of success in approaching retailers from the standpoint of how do we support their strategy. And so I'll tell you, when I first came into the company, I got the sort of obligatory kind of top-to-top tour with executives at our top retail customers and buyers. And as I went around and said, we think there's a role for this brand to play at the premium tier, and that will actually help you kind of spread the category, drive some margin and excitement back into the category. And we're planning to spend on product development and demand, what we call demand creation or marketing, to drive consumers into the brand, and in fact, the very best consumers, the ones you want, into your store. It was met universally with the response, why don't you take all that money you're going to spend on new product development and advertising and give it to us, and we'll promote your product and we'll sell some volume. And so when we refused to go along with that idea, there definitely was some tension. But we consistently, with retailers, communicated that we believe there was a strategy here that was going to support their strategy. It was going to support their help grow their categories. Eventually, once it started happening and proving itself to be true, and we were awarded distribution and supported that distribution with demand creation, as well as participating in their programs, then it sort of played out well. So the keys to these retail partnerships, first, offer something new. You heard that earlier. What is going to add to their category? I mean, none of us want to be sitting in front of a buyer trying to talk about why our product that looks just like the other product really would be beneficial. Well, maybe I can cut the price and make it worth your while. We don't want to have that conversation. So really understanding the categories and what the retailer goal is for that category, and then playing your product into a space where somebody isn't already sitting. We have had pretty good success in developing some unique and offering some unique consumer insights. You know, I'll rewind back to a much smaller company that I was running just about 10 years ago, where we were doing, you know, at the beginning about 20 million in revenue, and this was a strength for us as well. Well, we couldn't buy the research, we didn't have a consumer insights team, but we could sit around and think about the category a lot and bring in kind of a fresh perspective. And so there was one really large retailer. We were in the coffee business. There's one really large retailer that would stop in Portland to visit with us before going to see their largest supplier, Starbucks. And Starbucks is great. I'm not criticizing Starbucks, but I'm saying they knew they'd get something a little different from us, and they like to have that going in before they got the brilliant insights of the more well-resourced brand. Third, you know, we've got to offer new news. Now, we certainly have been caught off guard by this. Thought, well, look at all the share we're gaining and the traffic we're driving and the noise we're getting from the products. But still, if we don't have something new to talk about, we're not getting the meeting, and we're not serving them well in terms of the news that they would like to have. And then finally, participating in their programs has been a key for us as well. You know, not just to appease them, but also looking for ways to use their programs and our brands and our strategies combined in order to serve our brand well. You know, Kroger has somewhere around 56 million U.S. households that they have a direct relationship with, about almost half the U.S. population. It's an unbelievably powerful program that they have. So, you know, by combining brand and consumer insights in these three particular areas, those have been keys to the growth. I'll talk a little bit about culture, because that has definitely been a factor, both challenging and reinforcing of the strategy. We have around 900 employees. You probably saw it on an earlier slide. Almost exactly 450 of them were at the company before 2012, and 450 of them have come to the company since 2012. So you can imagine we have this really interesting cultural clash between somebody that's been there 47 years like Dale and somebody that showed up, you know, sort of in May. And so bridging that gap has been super important for us. Some of the keys to that, one is getting everybody aligned around this idea that growth is good. So easy for those of us kind of in the growth business or thinking about the strategy of a company and understanding why we're motivated to do that and be rewarded by that. Easy for us to forget that if you're cutting cheese or packaging cheese or running a fork truck, growth is maybe not a good thing, because you're gonna have to work harder and there's more demand and you know, fewer days off or whatever it happens to be. And so helping every employee in the company understand, first of all, the concept that if you're not growing, you're dying, as a general business orientation, but also just understanding how growth creates stability, opportunity, reinvestment in ways that actually matter to them. Connecting everyone to that mission and strategy, old and new, and co-developing the mission and the strategy together has been key for us, and again, has made the strategy better, because we've got folks who've been at the company for decades reminding us newbies, well, remember we stand for this, or we tried that before, or whatever, and it's definitely gotten better. You know, one of the things has been creating confidence by getting early wins and celebrating those early wins. You know, Tillamook in 2011 was very much a company that was incredibly proud of the history, the heritage, and the products, but a little bit on its heels in terms of confidence to compete with the large multinational companies that we compete with in our categories. And so recognizing some wins, we got, for example, an early win on a product development activity that played to our strengths as a 100-year-old cheese company, and sort of celebrating those things and sort of building that confidence in what existed already. And then bridging those natural barriers that I mentioned before between old and new, but also locations, levels, functions. One of the programs that has been particularly successful for us is we took the top 100 leaders, sent them through a pretty straightforward training program, nothing kind of revolutionary or breathtaking, but more just about giving everybody a common language. And then we started this program where every Thursday morning at 8:30 a.m., every one of those 100 leaders meets with a small group of 3 other leaders from across the company, and they just sort of, it's like a support group. They just sort of talk about how their leadership growth is coming, challenges they have, and we've got folks with all levels, all locations, all functions kind of getting together either by phone or literally in person. And that's been a super powerful program. Seemed like fairly straightforward, but it's really helped to bridge a lot of the gaps. So I'll just hit a couple of trends, and then I know I'm probably over time here, so I'll wrap up, that we're watching as we kind of plot the next phase of growth. The U.S. branded packaged foods business market is not growing. It's been relatively flat, and underlying that flatness is shrinking large sort of heritage brands and growth among the smaller kind of artisanal and premium brands. And so, but at the same time, we're in our 19th month of consecutive declines in food prices in the U.S. So we have this strange dichotomy where we've got tremendous downward pressure on cost, which would push towards scale and engineering, re-engineering the food in the supply chain in order to get costs out, which is what the consumer's looking for and largely what retailers are driving. While at the same time, we've got certainly some consumers in a big way selecting up to premium, but almost all consumers selecting up in certain categories for certain needs that they have. And so that sort of interesting clash and dynamic is one that we're keeping a close eye on. Second one is around retail landscape. As you have here, we've seen a tremendous amount of retail consolidation in the Western U.S., where there's essentially 4 or 5 retailers that control most of brands like ours, market access. And then we've got, and they're largely those mainstream retailers have been under attack and responding actually fairly well to movement into the markets from premium retail concepts. And then, of course, now with digital and direct-to-consumer and Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods, retailers are, they're smart, they're reacting, they're driving a lot of what the consumer's seeing around food. For example, a lot of certifications are being driven by retailers. And so there's a lot happening there. And then finally, consumer demographics and preferences. Obviously, there's a lot being made about the millennials moving into kind of that family raising stage, which for a brand like us, which highly family-oriented use cases, is very significant. U.S. demographics, it's not that long from now until the sort of Northern European descent white U.S. citizens are no longer a majority. So there's a lot of ethnic diversity increases happening in the U.S. And then one of the things that I've found very interesting, I read recently an article about how the indications of kind of economic status have changed over time, at least in the U.S. I can't really speak to it globally, but if you look at sort of early 1900s, economic status was about, I don't have to work. I have money and I don't have to work. And then sort of, there was economic status related to entering the middle class sort of in the mid-1900s. Towards the late 1900s, economic status then became about conspicuous consumption in many ways. And now a lot of what we're seeing is, particularly with the millennial generation, but with others as well, is economic status is about being in the know. It's about choosing that right exact heirloom tomato, or not necessarily vacationing in the most flashy way, but in the right place that maybe nobody else knows about. And so there's a lot of sort of the information related to the right choices becomes sort of that indicator of economic status. Not sure exactly where that's headed, but that's something in terms of how consumer sensibilities are changing about food that I do believe is driving some of those premium choices. Also, certainly significantly impacted by influencer behavior and influencer challenges. Okay, so I think that's what I had here. Thank you, and hopefully that was helpful.